dice. You never know if it could change your life. Take a chance, you're neither wrong or right. You never know if you don't roll them dice. You better roll them dice. You never know if it'll change your life.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Dungeon Master of None. I'm Dungeon Master Rob, and it's just me today. Matt is a little indisposed, so solo episode, just me talking about some things. Actually, specifically, I'm going to be doing a post-mortem of one of my campaigns, one that Matt didn't play in or run and has no familiarity with. I've been meaning to do this for a while, but it didn't make sense to do it with Matt necessarily because he had no context. So here's an opportunity for me to talk about a campaign that I ran and to allow you, hopefully, to learn from it. Learn a lot. I also hope that this will demonstrate to you that I certainly hope we haven't given this impression, but that we have it all figured out, because we really, really don't. Matt and I have been DMing for decades now, but that has been a serious series. Well, it's been a lot of trial and error, to be quite frank, and a lot of the advice that we give to you is hard-earned. And often comes because we made that exact mistake. And so I want you to see and hear about some of the mistakes that I made, so that hopefully you can be more aware of them in your own games, and also to give you some context to where I'm coming from when I talk about everything that is that I talk about. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about, or I'm going to give you sort of a rundown of a campaign that I ran that wrapped in 2019. It ran for 3 years, and it was an in-person game. Obviously, this was in the before times, pre-pandemic, and there were a lot of things that went right with this campaign, and there were a lot of things that went wrong. And I'm confident, and I'm sure that if you ask them, that all of the players had a good time, and nobody regrets playing it. In fact, I think they all had a great time and enjoyed it from start to finish. That being said, there were a lot of things that I could have done better, and there were a lot of unpleasant moments that I could have avoided if I had been a little bit more aware of, I guess, the things that I'm aware of now. So I'm going to just give you a big overview, and I'm going to talk about the things that I wish that I had done differently. So without further ado, this is Rob's postmortem of Dust to Dust, a 5th edition Eberron Grand Campaign. So I came up with this idea in, sometime in 2016. I had wanted to run an Eberron campaign for ages. I had run short ones in 3.5, but I had never run a full Eberron campaign, and there were some rules in 5th edition, but not many, but enough that I thought that I could probably do the home brewing that I needed to do. It's funny, almost all of the Eberron books came out after this campaign wrapped. The Artificer and the Rising for the Last War, all of the Eberron books, everything, even the Wayfinder's Guide, all of that came out after I was done with this, which was very frustrating, but that's on me. I jumped the gun. I got too excited. I am glad that those resources now exist for other DMs, but for me, they weren't there. So, but that didn't stop me. I had all of my handy-dandy 3.5 Eberron books, including Sharn, City of Towers, and so I was really excited to run a campaign. I had a group here in person and here in Portland, and I've always been very lucky to have a lot of people who wanted to play games with me. I have a couple of hype people here in Portland. I don't know what I have done to deserve them, but people who talk up my games. And so I had a number of people who wanted to play, and I had run a Kingmaker campaign. I'd run a Skull and Shackles campaign, both of which kind of fizzled before I could finish them, partially because I moved away. When I moved back to Portland, though, I was approached about starting up a group, and so I said, sure, I want to run an Eberron campaign. So I put together the outline for this, and this is sort of when when I started to make mistakes. Now, the big mistake that I made, and I want you to learn most directly from this, but the biggest mistake that I made was that my reach exceeded my grasp. I bit off more than I could chew. I planned a massive, sprawling, epic campaign, and I planned to do a lot of the homebrewing myself and do a bunch of extra work. And I was really excited at the start, and I did a bunch of prep for what I would call sort of like the first arc. But this was in scope and in vision entirely too broad. I really, really needed to start smaller and also stay small for longer. And I'll get into that later. But you probably don't. So here's the funny thing. So I entitled the whole campaign Dust to Dust. I wrote this in my notebook and in my documents. The idea was that the players were going to go through a series of arcs only to find out that they had been played the entire time by the Lords of Dust, who are powerful demon lords in Eberron and great schemers, and I thought this was a terrific idea. I even, referenced the campaign as such, giving it a hint to the players if they could figure it out, which of course they couldn't. None of them are huge Eberron lore nerds like I am. And the funny thing about this is that I never got there. Spoiler alert, we never even remotely got close to Lords of Dust level even after 3 years, and I, again, for reasons that I'm going to go into in a bit, kind of lost the plot and lost the ability and the enthusiasm for running this campaign. So this is my first piece of advice for you, is to and I think that when you listen to Matt and I talk about our games, you'll hear this, but I start small and keep the scope small, and also leave yourself room to stay small, right? To my credit, I did decide to start in Sharn, which isn't actually that small, but, bear with me, and stay there for a long time, and we did. And that was probably the best part of the campaign. That part of Eberron is very, very well detailed, and I had a lot of NPCs and a lot of plots and a lot of things to work on and a lot of detail to draw from, and as long as we stayed in Sharn, things stayed pretty under control. But I wasn't able to stay in Sharn, or I failed to stay in Sharn for as long as I probably should have. So my very, very first mistake started before I even had my first session. I made a pretty categorical, egregious error in how I planned to run the game. And so I bring this up for a lot of reasons, because it's a specific example, but also because this is advice that we give all the time, and I want you to know that it is hard-earned. If I could do this again, I still love the idea, but I would probably give myself a lot more time and a lot more flexibility, and I would also build in a lot more opportunities for things to go off the rails, right? It wasn't a strictly controlled campaign, but my players, or most players, but especially mine, don't do what you think they're going to do. And so this was not why I failed to achieve the grand goal of the campaign, but it did not help that a lot of what I thought was going to happen didn't end up happening, and the players didn't bite on things that I thought they were going to bite on. So lesson 1 is keep your scope modest at the beginning. 2, this is a much harder thing to get right, but I should have planned much further ahead given the scope of the campaign. And this is a little bit contradictory with what I just said, but I should have built out more. I should have extended my flowchart much, much more distantly into the future. I should have built out a lot more scenarios. I should have planned ahead. I had designed a really cool first arc where the players solve a mystery and they hunt down a terrorist from Sire who is, planning to drop Skyway on to the rest of Sharn by disrupting the Manifest Zone. It's very cool. I'm very proud of it. It was a great arc, and the terrorist was very sympathetic, and the players were conflicted, and they had to defeat him. Again, you know me, you know the type of campaigns I like to run, and that was great. I think that went really, really well, but that was about as far. I had vague notes and some high-level direction for what would happen after that, but I had only really written out the first arc in detail. And so what I should have done is I should have either spent more time in prep, or I should have taken a breather after we finished the first arc and done more prep. But really what I should have done is drawn, I did not, I had an endpoint, right? The Lords of Dust. And I had a beginning point, but I didn't really sketch out the middle. And this is very challenging. And again, this is contradictory advice because we always tell you to, let your players lead. But I should have had some idea of what would happen in between. And I should have, it is possible to write scenarios and design encounters and all that with your, player agency in mind. And I just kind of had this big, fuzzy middle idea, and I filled it with a lot of cool things, but I was really making it up as I went along. And some days that was good, and I had some notes and things to work from. And other days I was 100% winging it. No idea what was going to happen next. Waffling, way out over my skis. And the truth is that's very, very stressful. And I'm a pretty good improviser, but the truth is that being so unprepared made running that game very, very challenging. And so I don't want you, the DM, to get bogged down in doing a ton of world building or, meticulously detailing the inner lives of your NPCs. But if I were going to give you advice about what useful prep is, I would tell you that having a detailed flowchart, timeline, directions that your players might go, points where they might end up, fulcrum moments where the plot will hinge, theoretical things they might come to, just having a more detailed understanding of the way the campaign might progress. Or you can write out sort of your own adventure path or campaign. We again recommend that you let the players do as much guiding as they can, but if you're gonna, you can do this a number of ways. And what you should not do is write out a really detailed first arc and then underpants gnome it. Don't have question mark profit after you finish your very cool first arc. This was a mistake, and this was a consequence of being depressed and stressed out and completely burned out and overwhelmed. But I only made it worse by not being realistic about what I had to work with and trying to push through regardless. So that's lesson number 2. Now, you can avoid having to plan by just being more flexible and having a much more flexible adventure structure. Again, that's why I do a lot of episodic games these days. That's why I do a lot of games without a big bad or some sort of gigantic overarching ticking clock plot. But that's fun, and a lot of people like that, and you can still have that, but be warned that you really do have to do a lot of prep to make sure that it all comes together. Again, this was because I had set myself up this really exciting idea that, the entire time the Lords of Dust were behind every single, enemy, every plot that they encountered, and they'd been manipulated like puppets, marionettes from the very, very start. I thought I felt very clever. thinking that I was going to reach this endpoint, and that put a lot of pressure on me. Again, this didn't matter. The players don't even know this. They never encountered the Lords of Dust. But as you can tell, I spent a lot of time agonizing about it and trying to make it work. And so don't be like me. The next thing, now that was all prep work stuff that I did wrong. And that is not the only thing that went wrong with this campaign. I did not have a session 0 with my players. And I don't remember why I didn't. These are friends of mine, and I knew them pretty well. And we had all played in games together, or at least done a one-shot together. And so I didn't think I needed one. Again, this was years ago. I have learned a lot since then, but I didn't have a session 0. And the truth is, we really recommend it, and I think you really, really, really do need it. But, you can, if you know everybody, you can probably get away without it. Again, please don't, and I'll, again, example here in a moment, but, it makes the game better, and it strongly increases its chance of succeeding, but it's not, games have been running without session 0s for a long time. It's a, not a relatively new concept, but it is something that has only become really important in recent years when people started to think more critically about DMing. So all of that in mind, I assumed that I just thought that it would be okay. So this was a mistake. I should have had a session 0. I did not do a good job of setting expectations with people about what the campaign would be like and what type of campaign they wanted to play in. I found as the campaign went on that people were interested in very, very different things. And I don't know that there was any way to reconcile this group, but it might have helped to have a session 0. It might have helped to sit down and talk about what we wanted to do and what type of game we wanted to play, what type of things that people enjoyed. The other problem was that this was a very large group. There were, I think, a total of 10 players who cycled through that game, and for a little while, there were 8 regularly showing up to the game. This is another lesson that I really want to impart to you. That's too many people. And I should have said no to some of them, or I should have made some sort of, I should have split the group. I don't know. I really this is a bizarre problem to have because normally you don't, but having too many people show up to your games wasn't something that I had ever encountered before. And so I didn't want to tell anybody no. I didn't want to leave anybody out. And this ended up being a problem because I assumed if I said, whoever's here will play, and I kept having 8 people, which meant the game was very slow, especially during combat, and there were a lot of personalities clashing. A lot of people felt ignored or left out. Other people felt frustrated with other people in the group. There were a lot of interpersonal tensions. So I'm a lot more careful now when I put my groups together. And part of the problem here was that my hype people had invited a bunch of folks to the initial games. And again, that's a weird problem and not one that you encounter a lot. But I now know to be a lot more discerning and a lot more careful when I'm putting my groups together. The size of the group was one problem, but again, there were players who were purely there to do combat. There were players who were there just to hang out with their friends. There were players there who really, really got into their character concepts and really wanted to embody that concept. And most of the time we made it work, but it was sometimes difficult to keep it was always difficult to keep the group on track, and people often got frustrated. I struggled to make sure that everybody felt included and they were having a good time. So I do not allow groups larger than 6 anymore outside of really, really rare circumstances, but I also pay a lot more attention to group dynamics. Since that game, that group has split into 2. I have divided it into 2 separate groups who are interested in entirely different things. I have run one group I still play with regularly, the other I play with infrequently, but it was clear about, it was true from the beginning. I didn't realize it until about halfway through that I should have just split the group in half. And there wasn't a really good opportunity to do it until basically I needed to wrap the campaign. And this was the real reason that I wrapped it. I was, of course, like I said, out over my skis, completely making it up. But I also realized that the group was not going to hold together. There was a lot of resentment and frustration. And so I wrapped the campaign before I got to what I had intended to do. Now, there's another lesson here, and this is something that I really, really want you DMs to learn from me about, because this is a mistake that I have made and do make and am still learning. And that's that I should have taken breaks. I should have taken a lot more breaks, but I was running this game every single week for 3 years, except I think if I were out of town or everyone were out of town. And I was incredibly burned out by the end. I was probably incredibly burned out at the beginning. This was happening at a deeply stressful and challenging time in my life. And it was great to have a game, but I was struggling to keep up with it. And again, like I said, I'm good at improvising. And so I would go with some loose notes and just kind of wing it with my handy dandy Eberron books and throw some combats together and bring back some NPCs, make some jokes, and it was a good time, but I was constantly stressed out and struggling to make sense of the game, and I could have just taken a break. I could have just given myself, hey, players, I'm going to take a couple weeks off, get my notes together, and then we'll come back to this. You're allowed to do this. You're the DM, you're the GM. Please take advantage of the fact that you can just take a break. This is not easy for me. I feel like I'm letting people down if I don't show up, but it's entirely okay for you to do this. And if I had done this, I might have been able to recognize a lot of the problems of the campaign before they came up. And, a part of that is, again, this is advice that we give all the time, but I didn't sit down with my players and I didn't talk with them. And like I said, I don't think anybody had a problem with the campaign or with me, but there were problems within the group that I didn't address, even though I knew they were there. And I just sort of hoped that if I could just by sheer force of personality hold it all together. But really what I should have done is I should have sat down and I said, hey, feels like there's some tension in this group. Maybe we can talk about it. Or maybe it would be better if we split this into 2 different groups or something like that. Or just gotten it out in the open. But I didn't do that, right? I just papered over the issue. I just kept pushing forward. And in the end, I think that some people are never going to play together. And that's okay. They may not have been a good fit in the first place, but it's a bummer. I think I probably could have fixed that. I think I probably could have recognized the problems and done more to adjust for them. And, I don't want to place too heavy a burden on me. It's not my responsibility to make sure everybody gets along. But as the DM, I had an opportunity. I had a chance to try to make things better. And like I said, I've learned a lot since then, and I know a lot more than I used to. But I wish that I had the sort of the wherewithal to make those changes and to talk to the players and to try to manage it differently than I did, right? Rather than trying to just soldier on, sit down and work out the issues, right? Set a better foundation. And that's a lesson that I have learned, like I said, the hard way. And hopefully you won't have to learn the hard way. But I know better now, but at the time I didn't, and it ended up being, at times stressful and difficult, and, players that might be friendly with each other, might still be capable of playing games together, are not. And again, it's not your responsibility as a DM, but you can help mitigate those situations if you are paying attention. And it's always nice and it's good to do so. So this campaign ran for 14 levels, and it culminated in a great big battle with the Lord of Blades in the Mournlands, the top of a giant spiky tower, and they ranged all over Corvair and Zendrick, and I think even made a trip to Arganesson, and they fought all the big bads. And it was very satisfying, and everyone had a great time, and they got really attached to their characters. And so it wasn't a failure by any stretch of the imagination, but I think what I would really like for you to take away from this is that I spent most of those games feeling pretty stressed out, a little bit unprepared, and having a good time, but mostly just trying to stay ahead of the plot, trying to, appear like I knew what I was doing. And that's on me. My players didn't care. Like I said, they were having a good time. But regardless, you're supposed to be having fun too as the DM. And if the game is stressful for you, if the game is overwhelming, if you feel burned out, that's not good, right? That doesn't mean that you're a bad DM and that you need to try harder. It may mean that you need to take a break, that you need to rest, that you need to spend some time getting prepped, go back to the source, read your books, that sort of thing. And that's okay. That is an important part of being a DM, is recognizing your own limitations and living within them, right? Knowing when you have to step back, knowing when you might need to let somebody else take over DMing for a bit. And it's, that doesn't mean that your games are bad, and it doesn't mean that your players are not having a good time. It might or it might not. But you have to sort of be willing to put yourself first sometimes and understand that there's a lot of effort, a lot of work that goes into being a DM, and it's very, very rewarding, but that it's okay to step back if you're feeling like you're in over your head. The other thing that I want to impart to you is that talk to your players, be candid with them, have real discussions about how things are going. This isn't easy, but I promise you that it is easier than the alternative. And the earlier you get out ahead of this, the happier everyone will be. So that's sort of the big picture of Dust to Dust. I could talk about all of the many thousands of things that I did. One of the biggest regrets that I have, to be honest, has nothing to do with anything that I did. And it's all about the fact that all of those Eberron books came out after I'd finished the damn campaign. I did a bunch of homebrewing that was entirely redone or invalidated, or something better came out, and that's fine, but I'm a little annoyed about it. And, I wish I'd had those. That would have been great. But, you win some, you lose some. That's another lesson. Maybe don't pick a campaign setting that you have to homebrew everything for. I mean, you can if you want to, if that's fun for you and you have time and you aren't like me and actually do manage to prep appropriately for your campaigns. But all of that being said, I hope that this was interesting and educational for you. I hope that you can take something away from this. I wanted to share this because it's an example of how a technically successful campaign can still be, there's still a lot that can go wrong, and there's still a lot that you can learn from it. I don't think I've ever had a game that truly failed. Some of them fizzled, some of them petered out, but none of them blew up. I never had to abandon a gaming group, but even some of my successful ones, there's a lot I could have done better, and there's a lot I did wrong. And there's a lot of ways I could have made the game more enjoyable for myself and for my players. And so that's my big spiel. I hope that, you can take something from this. I do hope that you will learn from my example. Be kind to yourself, be kind to your players. Give yourself the prep time and the runway that you need to do a good job. step back if you are struggling, and just give yourself the space that you need to to enjoy the game. Again, you're allowed and you're supposed to enjoy it. It's supposed to be fun for you, not just fun for the players. So that's Rob's postmortem of Dust to Dust, a Eberron 5th edition campaign. If you have questions about this or thoughts, please write us at dmofnone@gmail.com. Add us on Twitter at dmofnone. I hope that this is something that you can get some inspiration, and also, please, dear God, learn from my mistakes and do not repeat them. Thank you all for listening. I hope you're having a wonderful week. Stay healthy, stay safe, and keep rolling them dice.
You better roll them dice. You never know if it could change your life. Take a chance, you're neither wrong or right. You never know if you don't roll them dice. You better roll them dice.